Hi, I'm Roshan Karyappa. Welcome to the 100th episode of the Startup Operator podcast. I couldn't think of a more apt guest for today than Yamini Bhatt. She's the co founder and CEO of Waymo, and also, more interestingly, my boss. Now, Waymo is among the handful of startups in the world that operate in the enterprise SaaS world. So, we work with some of the largest banks and insurance companies across the globe. And in this conversation, I spoke to Yamini about what it takes to build and sell for the enterprise. So, we focused on things like opportunities and challenges within the space, how to evaluate if you're ready and what you should do to graduate. Along the way, we discussed some of the nuances of setting up sales, customer success, product, and service delivery functions in the large enterprise world. This is a fascinating conversation, and I believe it's a master class for how one should operate in this enterprise SaaS space. I'm sure you like it, so do stick around. Hi, Amni. Welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me. My pleasure.
Yeah, I couldn't think of a more suitable guest for the 100th episode on the podcast. So, really looking forward to this conversation. So, the theme of
Same here, Rosh.
yeah, so the theme of this podcast will focus on building and selling to the enterprise. And Waymo is one of the handful of startups in the world that operates in the enterprise domain, right? So we have significant expertise in that. I'm familiar with part of the story, but just for some context for the listeners, how did we pick the enterprise, or did the enterprise pick us? Could you take us through some of that early days in terms of how that happened?
Yeah. So when we started the company, prior to that, I was at McKinsey. Co-founder was at Google, and he approached the whole problem statement of sales productivity in a very product-first way. I approached it in a very sales productivity is something I engaged with many clients on at McKinsey in a very consultative fashion. And for me, it was important to go and speak with CXOs of businesses to understand what was a problem worth solving and that we would meaningfully get paid for, right? And be able to capture value on. So my approach was very business stakeholder led right from the beginning. I do believe which part of the enterprise play you fall into, whether it's SMB or mid market or large enterprise or super large like whale accounts, etc., kind of depends on the background you have as founders. If you look, for examples like Nutanix, right? If you take, that was probably the third startup of some of those founding team members. Everything that they tried before that was also in large enterprise. Some of the co-founders there had background serving with large SIs like TCS, etc. Nutanix became a hit. Many of those founding members later went on to found other companies and become CEOs like ThoughtSpot, Rubrik, etc. All of them again target large enterprise, right? So it's something about the DNA that you identify with a certain level of customer. And if you look at the cohort of startups that the Zoho team later went and founded, most of them target SMB. Again, there is this whole DNA that has seeped into that's helping them identify better with that problem statement or customer segment, right? So I do believe a lot of McKinsey McKinsey alumni either going to B2C or usually going to large enterprise software, right? And that's again a carryover of the DNA. You've consulted, you've engaged deeply with sponsors, business leaders, etc., and you carry that forward. So I do think it's a very core part of DNA. And for us, the journey was did we were very stakeholder led. We did have initial conversations with SMB mid market. Very quickly realized that the problem statement we are trying to solve, which is being able to learn from the best sales reps and coach others, required larger information sets to be relevant and have impact, right? So we needed scale to be able to solve that. And naturally, moving towards larger and larger sales teams made sense for us. That's how we shifted very quickly up market and started targeting whale accounts.
Right. So if I understand correctly, it's very intrinsic to an organization, right? I mean, you can add certain nuances and you can add certain features of the large enterprise play, but it's also very intrinsic, and a lot of it is dependent on the founder journey itself, right? And here, as the marketing guy, I have to add that Waymo today works with 60 plus large enterprises, some of the largest banks and insurers, you know, across Asia, Japan, and the US. So there's a lot of interest growing in the ecosystem about going enterprise, right? Literally the hot topic right now is how do you build for the enterprise, sell to the enterprise, and so on, right? What are some things that founders should beware of in terms of opportunities and challenges? What makes the enterprise different?
Yeah. So usually every function is different when you're targeting, the larger the customer you're targeting, right? If you take marketing, for example, Roshan, we know from our own experience that we don't expect our customers to discover us through the website, right? So showing up on the front page of Google again is not the agenda for us. There are two angles to it. One is which segment of customer do you target? There is also whether your category is new or existing. In ours, Waymo being a large enterprise, in a way, a greenfield categories, a category that we are creating, this natural discovery is not the way our customers find us, right? But events and influencer networks are ways in which we get to our target ICP, right? Therefore, those matter a lot. So that's a simple example of marketing. Now, every single function has its nuances when you're dealing with an SMB customer base versus a large enterprise customer base. And therefore, it starts with probably the founder's background DNA on which problem statement and stakeholder they identify with. But very soon you'll see that every single person you hire, business functional leaders that you bring into the company, processes you said, what you celebrate, for example, start getting attuned a lot to the customer segment that you're tracking. In this case, for us, large enterprise, right? I remember one of the first crazy parties we had in Waymo was when we cracked into the largest bank in the country, right? And it was not about 2,000 users or 10,000 users, etc. It was about winning that major logo, right? And even till date, the first major logo of any new market is a game changer for us because usually it's one of the top three insurers or one of the top five banks, and that's a very, very big deal, right? So every aspect of the company starts looking different.
Right. So the problem statement that you pick to solve becomes super important. And here again, right, what is a useful self-evaluation criteria for founders looking at this enterprise itself, right? I mean, in terms of am I important enough for, let's say, a CXO to sign, or something of the decision making could be at a manager level or maybe at a senior manager level and so on. Would my budgets get allocated at the beginning of the year, or I mean, it could be some discretionary budget and so on and so forth, right? And there are of course positives and negatives to both of this, and there are nuances to both of this. So what is an important self-evaluation criteria for founders looking at am I relevant for enterprise or not?
Yeah. So what I usually see when I meet a bunch of startup founders in the SaaS space is when we share Waymo journey, usually every founder there identifies with the large enterprise story. The fact that we spent 1 year educating a customer and boom, it's a $1 million deal, right? And everyone's eyes shine that what one customer 1 million, and here I had to go acquire 10,000 to make it to 1 million. It's a very different story, right? I think there are a few things founders need to think of. Actually, two fundamental things, I think, to really pressure test whether their organization's DNA can adapt to large enterprise. Because you'll always have, once you have 10, 15 customers, you'll always have one who looks really bigger than the rest, right? The Pareto principle kicks in, and then you start wondering, can all my customers be like that? Of course, the fundamental question is the product and the market you are targeting, does the large enterprise make it meaty enough, right? For companies like Microsoft, Salesforce, 70-80% of the revenue even today comes from very large enterprises. Does that mix apply to your product segment? It's worth, for example, if you're targeting marketing agencies, then or if you're targeting telcos and there are only three large, like apply your product to that segment and see whether that makes sense or not, right? For you to be able to get to like 100 million scale, for example, theoretically. But outside of that, there are two things that are worth asking. My life is very different from an SMB founder's life. 90% of their time is usually spent in office with their product team, making sure every button behaves in a certain way on the whole user journey, right? 90% of my time goes into speaking with CXOs to build top-down momentum for the category we are creating and get their buy-in to invest in something like Waymo when they were one, not even probably aware that there is a area of software that can solve their core problems, but also have not even budgeted for something like this, right? So how do they make it front and center, and how can I tie something like Waymo into their top two business problems for the year, right? So 90% of my time goes into that. The second aspect is how that finally gets executed, right? Which is usually speaking with one customer, you believe you can solve their problem. I would urge anyone who's trying to do an upmarket journey to speak with 10, 15 customers in one go, like back to back over 10 days, over 30 days, right? hear out all their stories. When it's one customer you speak with, you feel like you can adapt three things in the product and service this customer, put one person to take care of the account, right? When you speak with 15, you will have to distill and see what is the lowest common denominator that the product as is will solve, and how much above that needs to be configurable and adapt to legacies of these 15 companies, right? And that's where you'll realize how the whole journey itself looks different, and how supporting 15 of those customers will require an entire different org culture and skills and competencies to be built versus what you have today. And that's what you need to sign up for. The second mistake that I've seen many make is, once they've made the bet on enterprise, they're dragging their feet and trying to keep the SMB segment also alive, because that's how you started. You've shown some success. Potentially, you've even raised funding, right? And then you want to continue that while you have acquired one or two or three customers in enterprise. And that's where probably you'll end up not satisfying either segment, because the product calls you to make or calls you to make are dramatically different, right? So if you do that, right, ask yourself the question, are you okay spending 90% of your time speaking with customers rather than your product team? And second, have you had enough 10, 15 of those conversations and can identify a path on how the product will look, and you're okay building the product and the org that way? That's when I would suggest you should be making the leap. And of course, all of that should add up to a journey up to 100 million at the least. Right?
Right. So, I mean, for me, I've always been paranoid about landing in the middle, right? I mean, neither enterprise nor not properly SMB,
Yeah.
and not having a template to kind of replicate either your product thinking or your sales or whatever else. You referenced category creation a couple of times, and I want to talk about that specifically, right? Now, everybody today wants to create a category because this SaaS world is big, cloud is big, and everything could arguably become a $1 billion market 10 years down the line, right? Now, again, this is one of those things that, is it necessary for founders to fight this battle, in the year zero, year one of their journey? Or is it something that organically sort of builds up and becomes a meaningful category by itself? What do you think, in your opinion?
I think part of, again, I think it comes to the DNA of the company. I would say, if depending on what your end goal is, you want to build a unicorn, it's not like you have to take a choice between category creation or competing in an existing category, right? For example, today, if someone, what is the largest SaaS category? It's probably CRM, and Salesforce is the biggest, right? If someone, Waymo sits on top and attempts to add 10x more value on top of that in terms of driving sales productivity. So we are trying to create a category around sales acceleration. But it's quite possible for someone to say, hey, you know what? Ultimately, Salesforce is a system of record, right? I need it to be less complex. Here is an enterprise system of record, which is a database that anyone in the org can access based on the permissions and rights. And it's 10x faster than Salesforce. And we will only ever be a easily accessible, friendly database, right? And by the way, we are probably 1/100th the complexity and probably 1/10th the cost, or even like 70% the cost. I have a feeling a lot of enterprises would bite that, because the product pitch is way more cleaner. After 20 years of existence, Salesforce is a great system of record, not where action happens, right? So someone can actually simplify that problem statement, compete, and potentially be a big mover in this market. So I don't think it's necessarily important to invent a category. If you look at it today, suddenly SaaS valuations have gone from like 8x, 10x. Like when we were doing our series A, 6x to 10x, we had to fight, right? Or show value on. Then somewhere it started growing like 12x to 15x was debate, and now it's 40 and nobody is blinking, right? So, and even public markets has it at 20. So even that has seen a huge journey upwards. Why is that happening? I do believe when you look at a situation like COVID and you see the largest enterprises moving in terms of digitization, you realize that the stack that will get replaced over the next few years is massive. Everything will get replaced. Core banking systems will get replaced. Databases will get replaced. API systems will get replaced. Many systems will get replaced, right? If you look at it that way, today out of a large enterprise's entire IT budget, probably less than 1% is SaaS. So think about the value that the 100% will create when it's getting replaced, right? And a lot of business budget for solving problems, a lot of consulting budget, all of that coming into SaaS, right? So there is a massive market, and 90% of the market as of date could be about replacing core systems. So I don't think necessarily you have to create a new category. Part of that was our choice, because we started with, I think Venkat and my DNA was in Can we do enterprise software in a very user loved way and a user first way? And can we learn from the org itself to figure out how to move the needle on sales, right? So that required innovation. Nothing was doing that. No one was designing solutions from a end user experience point, employee user experience point of view, right? Which naturally put us on the path towards innovation and turned out to be a new category. So otherwise, I don't think people should consciously like only do that to capture value.
Right. Yeah, one of the defining traits of Waymo, and again, I'm not trying to pass off some marketing spiel, but genuinely what I experienced when I first used Waymo was the amount of user love there was, right? Because I've used CRM systems, you name it, starting from VTiger in 2008 to Salesforce, and I've built on Salesforce as well. And one of the things that hits you immediately when you use an enterprise product is how little focus there is on the end user who has to use it perhaps 90% of the time more than anyone else, right? So it's sold to managers, but it's also built for managers, most of the enterprise systems. And you're right. I mean, I think literally the entire stack is going to get SaaSified. With that out of the way, let's look at some of the functional nuances, right? And I want to look at sales. Now, with enterprise sales, first of all, enterprise sales is very sales led, right? So you build with your customer, and there are certain very unique characteristics about enterprise sales that I feel like people who have operated outside of it will find very weird, or even like, will not be able to make peace with, right? We've sold to 60 plus large enterprises across the world. We've seen various types of these folks, right? What have we learned at Waymo about serving these large enterprises from a sales perspective? What do you think works? What absolutely doesn't?
Yeah, many actually question, and I've seen this even amongst investor community, right, where they question that because every single client of Vimos is, usually one of the largest banks or insurers, it's quite possible that we have built a lot of custom stuff, that the code base is not common, that, every customer is unique, can the product be copied, etc. Happy to clarify that all of our customers are sitting on the same code base, and there is only configuration on top and integrations on top, right? It's not like we're custom building stuff for clients. So one of the very important things to recognize is SaaS, large enterprise SaaS products are as replicable and repeatable and scalable, if you think of it that way and build it that way, as SMB ICB products are, right? What is different though is 90% of the go to market team's effort and time will be spent trying to understand a customer's unique problems. They may not be that unique. Two insurers may actually be facing the same problem. All of them face agent attrition as an issue, right? Or agent productivity as an issue, or agent activation as an issue. But you have to listen to their unique stories, acknowledge their problems as unique, acknowledge their technology challenges as unique, make them feel like your product is tailored to solve their unique problems and can be customized, taking into account both their legacy as well as the future journey they want to get to, but also help you set the pace for that journey. You can't, no enterprise leader will believe overnight they can transform because the software is so cool. There's a lot of change management that goes into moving the needle for an average of, for example, 10,000 salespeople suddenly getting onto a new system, right? I think 90% of our go to market team's time goes into listening and acknowledging that and marrying that back with the product story. Many people who see this from outside assume 90% of it is going into nuancing the product to be different in two cases. It's not, it's the same product. 90% is going into making them feel that we understand and can uniquely solve their problems, right? So that is the big difference. So a lot of time goes into awareness, solutioning, positioning how this solves your problem, and then the typical sales things, right? Why us, why now? But a lot of time goes into that upfront marrying this with your context kind of storytelling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, one of the things that I realized soon as I started doing sales calls was beyond a point. People didn't really care about your features and workflows as much as what it could do for them. Right. What is your solution beyond the product itself? And I want to delve on a couple of things that you brought up. Right. So one is the fact that you have to your sale has to be consultative. Right. Your salesperson has to know the business, has to sort of understand the customer's day in the life in some sense, right? And also engineer the solution to meet their outcomes per se, right? And we've had to verticalize a fair bit for the industries that we serve, whether it's banking or insurance, right? So can you just talk about that verticalization journey, how it started and, what are some things you've learned on that front?
Yeah. Yeah, verticalization for us was a confluence of two, three things happening, right? One is you know that you're creating a new category, and the category some claims that we will have sales impact the outcomes, right? Will really move the needle, and we will do it in an intelligent way in a large distributed employee base, right? Which require us to be able to learn from data coming in, behavioral information coming in. Now, when you're trying to do something like that and actually promising outcome movement, it's tough to not build context into it. You'll have to understand the way insurance is sold is very different from the way like a pack of chips is sold is very different from the way software is sold, right? And building that buying journey into your solution helps you be way more sharpshooting and intelligent, right? Which was one choice we made towards. If truly we have to build a coaching network, right, and learn from the best salespeople and communicate that down to an average salesperson, we have to have vertical context so we can make that more and more relevant. It's very easy for intelligent solutions to be precisely wrong. It's very important for intelligent solutions to be vaguely right, right? And in trying to do that, context helps, and verticalization gives you that context, right? The second thing which worked in our favor was we start on Asia side of the world, and then now we are going global to the Western markets, right? Financial services happens to have very similar broad models of selling around the world, and therefore the use cases are applicable for a larger TAM. Also, the logos are very highly referenceable. So that helped us address the TAM and geographic expansion journey also. So it was a confluence of these two things that made us very confident, and also realizing that for some of the largest enterprise companies, 70% revenue came from their large accounts, and more than half of that was usually financial services. Like if you look at Gartner or Microsoft, BFSI, banking and financial services, and insurance is the largest vertical, and in many cases the only named vertical. Even if you look at Seismic today or Adobe, etc., out of their horizontal solutions, the vertical is usually targeting BFSI, right? That gives you confidence that you're addressing roughly about 40-50% of the large enterprise market anyway, right? So that gives you a reasonably sizable TAM.
Right. So let's move to customer success. And one of the things, again, that everyone indeed can learn from large enterprise is how much of an overlap there is between sales and customer success, right? Because sales is extremely consultative and customer success is also, usually we hire people from our customers, essentially, right?
Yeah.
People with banking experience or insurance experience to really help our customers learn how to use the product and engineer the outcomes that they so desire, right? So this is all way beyond just expansion and growth and helping customers understand how to use the product as such. So what have our key learnings on customer success been over the last like 7-8 years?
Yeah, for us, so about 50% of Waymo's bookings every year come from expansion, right? Which is existing customers. It also happens that like we are a land and expand kind of a product. So usually the land deals could be 100K, and finally like 3 years later, that account could be $1 million account, right? Which means the 100 to million, which is a 900K journey, has happened through expansion. So those deals are usually much bigger, right? Therefore, while the core DNA of a sales and CS person are still different, like one is driven by the bookings and deal closure and the commissions, and the other is driven by outcomes and impact and being a trusted advisor, right? While that is different, both are extremely consultative in the case of Waymo, right? And which is exactly how you said. For us, our learning over the last 8-9 years has been that, sorry, it's now 7 to 8 years, has been that one, customer success, the first job when you're launching with any new customer is to make sure that the launch promise is delivered. The fact that we can go live within 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever's committed, right? The fact that you can replace ABC systems that you have, the fact that you can view this kind of data, or you get these kind of insights, that promise has to get delivered. And many times that is usually sitting with the delivery teams, the solutioning and delivery teams, right? Because a lot of communication on understanding customers context comes into place, and then configuring the solution, like it's 80-20. 80% of that is the conversation and understanding bit, 20% is actually the configuration of the solution itself, right? That is the first problem statement. Until that happens, we cannot move on to the second problem statement, which is actually being able to show you impact on your outcomes or nudging you in the right direction to extract ROI out of this whole investment. But we notice that the moment solution has gone live, we have adoption, right? And we've solved all the adoption related challenges, etc. Once it's become the way they work, it's CS's role has often been about highlighting one or two levers at any point in time that can help the business leader with control on how to move the needle, right? For example, your lead conversion rate is X%. A CS person even looking on behalf of the business sponsor at the data and saying, hey, you know what, 16% of your leads are not getting allocated within even 3 days. That's massive leakage. And here is one thing we can tweak to allocate it within the first 15 minutes, right? That makes a business leader believe that they have a lot of control on the journey that they need to take to deliver their own outcomes, right? That becomes a primary responsibility of the CS person. Give levers and highlight insights that can help business leaders act and unlock value for themselves.
Right. Yeah, it's just way beyond typical project management type of thing where you tell me what to do and I will configure this for you, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you're actually being proactive and helping the person. You're not just selling a car; you're teaching a person how to drive it as well efficiently.
yeah,
And um,
yeah,
we spoke earlier about building with customers, right? And in the large enterprise, your roadmap is defined by the first few customers that you work with, right? And it's
yeah,
a delicate balance, I would say, right? Because the first few people you work with really define your destiny. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how do you balance what is core to you, right? What your vision is, and with what the first few customers want, and it could even be people in new geographies, for
yeah,
example, where you're keen to land a logo and so on, right? So how do you do this delicate balance?
yeah. Again, there is a very common outside in perception that your first few customers have irreversibly, probably meddled with your product vision and roadmap, right? Again, I would go back to the same thing, which is at any point in time when you're making the journey into a new segment or with your first few large enterprise customers, don't have one conversation, have 10 in parallel, right? And initially, customers understand if you are going to say, we don't have this today, we will consider this into our roadmap, right? Don't overcome it beyond that. Once you have 10, you will yourself have very clear sense of what will never make it to the roadmap versus what should potentially be part of your roadmap because it's the real hook to locking in these customers or expanding or unlocking value for them, etc. Right? So you'll become clearer on your medium term yes and no answers. So that is the first part, right? The second tip we have here is you will have to say no. In the case of SMB, the no is very straightforward. What you demo is what you get mostly. In the case of enterprise, there is the art of saying no, right? And that usually, this is where product comes first and understanding of the customer's context comes into play. You have to be able to tell them why, in this one aspect, they need to become future ready, and therefore, your way to do it is the right way to do it rather than their way to do it, which is carrying the legacy a few years forward, which probably is not advantageous to them, right? So you have to portray it in light of their own the journey they themselves need to go through, right? And why now is the time for them to make that decision and therefore sell the product way of doing it rather than their unique way of solving it. So two bits. Don't have one conversation, have 10. Second, there is a way to say no. It's mostly around helping them become future ready and communicating that way.
Right. Yeah, customers are a great way of identifying problem statements and challenges, but they're not the best at offering solutions, right? Because often when you hear solutions from customers, it's very, very low resolution, and doing that whole
Yeah,
jobs to be done exercise in terms of what do you really need or what do you want to solve, right? You want to go from point A
yeah,
to point B. I mean, do you just want rollerblades or do you want like a rocket ship, right? And
yeah.
really understanding that is where all of the product thinking comes into play. Can you recollect one or two instances where you were really tested on building something really outlandish for a particular customer and it was a hard no for you to say?
Yeah. So there are times when we felt some of this could actually be the way this industry works. There are times when we realize that this is a unique one-off situation where we are probably having to pander to legacy for a bit too long, right? Definitely, there is one of the features Waymo has is to be able to suggest to a rep what's nearby. For example, if you have a meeting on Fifth Avenue on Friday at 11 a.m., the tool might suggest here are five other customers who need to be engaged who are close by, so you can ping them and figure out if they're available, right? It's meant to be, like, again, like I said, intelligent solutions have to be roughly useful rather than precisely wrong in their advice, right? That's literally the first step of intelligence that someone needs to crack. So our goal there was to be approximately useful and help you action some things which intuitively you would have done, rather than pointing to one customer and saying, here is another meeting you have to do. The customer, when many times we've seen this behavior repeatedly, customers believe that there is one precise way to solve it. In this case, the customer wanted the rep to drag and drop the exact route that they will take and then lock that in and then start escalating any deviation you see. Right now, our salesperson's route may change for various different reasons. Maybe they need to have lunch. Maybe a better opportunity came for a better meeting. Maybe a customer was a no-show, right? Now, by trying to be precisely right and solving for this exact scenario the client thought of, you will probably irritate the hell out of every salesperson using the solution, right? And that is where you needed to. I think the first time we heard something like this, we kind of believe that this is what every sales leader may want to do, right? Which is where the first learning, that speak to 10, not just one, right? And then find a way to do an MVP and test this out. You do the MVP, no one is using that feature. You have evidence to show the customer this might not have value. Take the chance to A/B test another way to do this, adds value, and that's you've proven to the client, right? It's not an easy journey, but early on, probably you need to have not just the conviction, your way versus my way, but actual intuitive sense of what the market needs versus what one customer wants to be able to make that decision, right? But yes, we did go down such paths, and thankfully, there were mistakes, not really blunders, so we were able to recover fairly quickly. And the lesson we have learned today is every product person, every solutioning person has the question they have to ask is, tell me your problem, articulate your problem, right? Don't tell me how to build it. I understand how you want us to build it, but tell us the problem and we might have 5 other ways to solve it. Easier sometimes, not so easy many times, but that's something that we need to we keep solving for.
Right. Yeah, I think we couple of things, right? So one is I think we've built a great amount of product intuition, right? Simply from having operated in the space and really learned from the space. And second is also the amount of data that we have, right, from all of the deployments that we've done, and we're able to marry that very well to sort of present a more cohesive kind of a solution to the customer itself or prospect itself most of the time. All right, now let's talk about something which is like a bad word in typical SaaS, right? Which is services. People really shy away from services. They're very reluctant to think about it, and there's all sorts of things like, okay, we're a product company. Why should we bother, customizing this, that, whatever? But we've spoken again plenty of instances in this podcast where we've said you'll have to build with the customer. The customer defines your product roadmap, and so on and so forth. And the fact that all of this expansion revenue is there for the taking. You can literally expand your enterprise accounts by 30, 40, or even 50% as we've done. So how should someone think about building a service delivery function, right? And also a related question is that should services be profitable by itself, or I mean, would you say that you can absorb it as a cost in your initial phase of the journey and so on?
Yeah. Two different angles there, right? If you are a point solution with a large enough TAM, probably services may not be the way you implement or become relevant to a customer, right? For example, a Gong kind of a solution working on only a Salesforce kind of an integration still has massive TAM because you are recording and giving advice with roughly similar configurations across customers, right? So you might get to a very large revenue base and customer base without the need for massive amounts of configuration or integrations into multiple systems. The moment you say, hey, I'm going to tell a rep exactly what to say in terms of a script, it's suddenly the vertical aspect becomes very important. The solutioning aspects become very important, and service delivery is also 90% solutioning it right, etc. Right? So, and then you're going to use that information into L&D systems, in compensation systems. Suddenly, the integrations start mattering a lot more. So, definitely, point solutions with a large TAM in sitting on top of one core platform have lesser dependency on services initially, right? Platform solutions. Now, if you look at like Zoom has lesser dependency on services. Now, if you look at Viva or nCino or Salesforce, which are platform solutions which are trying to address the way a function itself works. Waymo also, like this is the playbook for the function and a very large part of your workforce to work every day, and it's core to how you operate, suddenly the services aspect becomes important. Again, 90% of that is solutioning and change management. Literally, in terms of time spent, 10% probably might actually end up being configuration, right? Now, if you see bookings of these companies, right, Viva, 50% of the booking purchase order is usually services, sometimes more than that. And similarly with Salesforce, and there are core systems like core banking systems where 75-80% of the initial booking amount might actually be services because it's that much upfront effort. In the case of Waymo, it's thankfully not as heavily dependent on nuanced services every time to launch, but there's one aspect where services has humongous value. Waymo solves sales outcomes as the problem statement, right? Now, sales is especially with so much digitization happening on around customer experience and customer journeys, a lot of enterprises, whether they're banks or insurers who are our targets, are going through massive amounts of digitization in their whole customer touch points, right? Therefore, there are a lot of new solutions being tested. Some of them work, some of them don't work. Waymo being the platform of choice for salespeople to run their days on needs to be integrated with all of this transformation that is going around it, right? So on the day we launch within 4 to 6 weeks. But every 3 months, the choke point on sales has moved to a different problem statement. They are digitizing that aspect to remove that choke point. And Waymo needs to talk to whatever that solution is because we are the system of engagement with the salespeople, right? So our journey, service celebrating is less about customizations. It's a lot about staying integrated and being relevant to a journey that's taking the customer into the future, a continuous transformation journey. And therefore, it's not taboo. It's something that we always like when we started our dedicated services team, we believe that launch and get the team out. And we've realized in our space, we can never get the team out because if the moment we say there is no new integration needed, the client is stagnated. And they're stagnated for a reason. They're probably going through a business crisis. Otherwise, how will sales and growth innovation stagnate? It shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
So continuous service on this front for us actually means that the client is doing really well and is good signal for us. And we've built a model to be able to support that.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly important for us to integrate in the journey of the multiple users itself, right? And if you look at the various hierarchies of users, etc., they may be using God knows how many systems in the stack itself. So it becomes super relevant for us, to build for that. We've spoken about sales, about product, about customer success, and service delivery. Let's talk about partnerships, right? And again, partnerships is like a summation of all of these things. You could have sales partnerships, and you could have service delivery partners someday in the future. You could have product partnerships where you say that I don't really want to build all the bells and whistles of this entire thing. I can integrate with a few of these readily out of the box available solutions and so on and so forth. So how do we think about partners specifically when you look at the various functions as such?
Yeah. So in our case, again, I think the answer may be different for different companies, even targeting large enterprises. In our case, it was, let's talk about the different partnerships that can happen, right? We're working with very large enterprises, and outside of 1-2 systems, usually it's their auxiliary systems are not standard. 50% of the market might be on a similar CRM, but the other 50% is very, very diverse, right? And so therefore, for us, product partnerships comes last. Product partnerships come when we are seeing a repeated ask across customers and consistency in the kind of problems our auxiliary systems need to solve for. And there is a reasonably clear winner in that segment, right? There could be whether it's a CRM that's reasonably standard in that industry, or it could be a content management system which is becoming more standard within the industry, etc. Only then do product partnerships truly come into picture, or it could be the cloud that you're deploying on. So those have been the few product partnerships that we've actually done. It's been with one of the largest CRMs, it's been with some of the largest cloud providers, etc. The thing that for us, given we target large enterprises, there are many that where we can work directly with. There are many whose core systems are also heavily solution for or maintained by SIs. So go to market to those accounts becomes partners also help us, SIs as partners or consultants as partners also help us access these accounts and also give comfort to the customer that yes, we know your CRM deployment is crazy. We know that because we have helped you set it up. But we also know that here is Waymo, which fits extremely well into a situation like this and has already done this in 3 other places. It brings the credibility, right, for helping you open doors into some of these large accounts. Outside of that, like I said, large enterprise scenario, especially with a new category, it's a lot about influencer marketing for us to open doors rather than, for example, website or keyword discovery or AdWords discovery or SEO, right? And therefore, those partnerships with influencers within that community, like ex leaders in banking, right? Ex head of retail bank of one of the largest banks in that country might help us open doors with many other banks, especially if we have solved the problem for their own bank in the past, right? So, go to market or sales partnerships for us are primary. Service delivery, we have taken a call not to outsource that for at least another couple of years. And that was largely because we were getting into bigger and bigger markets. So we were discovering what the endpoints of products should be or shouldn't be, and what boundaries need to be configurable versus customizable versus integratable, etc. Right? So we did not draw the lines very thickly, and therefore it's tough to expose the code base or some of those loose ends to third party for service delivery. So we chose to keep it in house. Also, we wanted to make sure that the first 5-10 customers in every major market see the best of Waymo, right? Solve it the right way, and that's why we've kept it in house for now.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to your role as a CEO, right? I kind of look at you as an orchestrator. You're able to get all of these teams to rally around one core mission. And oftentimes in our journey, a certain metric has become our North Star, right? So I remember 4 years back, adoption was a huge deal for us. I remember walking into the office and you would see the adoption numbers, right there for everyone to see. And literally everyone was paranoid about that. Then expansion, and then net new logos, so on and so forth. At various points, I mean, these metrics become super important, right?
Yeah.
How important is it to define that one North Star metric for your teams at a company level, and how do you get your teams to rally around that North Star metric?
Yeah. So first of all, thankfully, I like to keep things simple, at least, while the org itself is very complex because we are in 7 countries, 3 major regions that we're catering to, massive teams spread out, etc. At least in terms of what we need to achieve, it usually comes down to one number at any point in time. Early on, DAO, which is adoption, daily active users for us, was very important because we were saying our entire journey started by saying, hey, enterprise solutions built user first. We'll solve the problem of the user. We'll be his or her personal assistant, right? So that would be a complete outright lie if our DAO was 10-20%, just like any big CRM, right? Then what is the big difference for all our claims? Therefore, that mattered. It mattered because we really wanted to be honest to the problem we were solving. We genuinely believed, and even today know, that you solve that problem, you have that customer for life. We've been in this really privileged position where we've never lost an enterprise customer. The only time that has happened in COVID or very similar situations was when they went through business disruption or bankruptcy or some such, right? We've never lost a customer that we were delivering value for otherwise. Now, that is truly because they know that they've tried solving some of this on their own or with something else, but this is the first time they're seeing very high degree of adoption and a reliability of data coming in through these systems. So that is why DAO mattered a lot for us. And then it was about, you have one logo, you need to get to 10-20. So we counted logos, we counted large banks, large insurers coming, first account in every market, etc. Once you raise funding, I have to be honest about it, growth matters a lot. So the North Star metric was bookings. It was about that 2x, 3x, whatever, depending on our life stage, right? Hitting that year on year. And at this point in time, for us in the last year, in spite of COVID happening, etc., there were hard numbers we were shooting for, both in terms of growth, and there were milestone markers we were looking for in terms of breaking into 2 of the biggest markets in the world, right? And we rallied the whole team behind that and committed ourselves to it no matter what, right? And that happened, thankfully. Sometimes it's not like it always happens, right? This year, now that those markets are broken into, we are rallying teams heavily behind a certain minimum scale we need to. So it's proof is done. Now prove that this is scalable and predictable, right? And again, it comes down to certain growth numbers within these markets, certain booking numbers, etc., right? But the number itself has our North Star metric itself has changed over time and will change. What has remained the same is, at any point in time, there is one thing we have cared about more than everything else, right? And it becomes easy because it's easy for teams to make choices. Drop the ball here versus drop the ball there, because in a startup, you're usually crunched for bandwidth. You will drop the ball somewhere. Which one is okay to, right? And this North Star metric usually allows you to make some choices on this.
Right. Yeah, that prioritization becomes super important on a daily basis, and also it's such an easy way to communicate what is right to the organization, right? I mean, it's such a scalable aspect, I would say. And last year, I think one of my favorite moments was, a week after we had announced the work from home, and how everyone literally came together, many nights, many different teams, to really figure what our strategy should be going forward, right? And the way we reacted to it is, I mean, it was such a
Yeah,
visceral, yeah,
yeah,
amazing feeling. So,
yeah.
in all that we've discussed, we've realized that, a lot of the times teams overlap, and they have to overlap in some sense, and they have to work together. How do you ensure that, their efforts amplify, and, they don't cancel each other out? Because oftentimes, I mean, they might be at odds with each other, whereas one team is looking for something, and like, for example, sales is looking for bookings, and CS is looking for customer love and expansion, not expansion at that point, but they're sort of at odds at each other in some sense, right? How do you get teams to sort of overlap very meaningfully with each other, and not really cancel each other's efforts out?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been great about Wimo is every one of our functional leaders have understood that ambiguity will be part of how you live. And while you have North Star, what is right and wrong, in the short term, medium term, it may not be the same things which are right and wrong, right? You will do things in the short term which may not work for you at scale, and you should not be doing at scale. I do believe between functions, a bit of healthy friction is necessary. Marketing has to push product, product has to rein in marketing, right? Sales has to push product, product has to rein in sales, right? And same thing, sales will value sell but cannot cross the line. Otherwise, customer success has to bear the brunt of how do you create product out of thin air, right? So there is healthy friction. Initially, it used to scare me. Initially, I felt like I had to solve for everything and show exactly what the black and white line is. And somehow, the black and white line 3 years down, what is obvious at scale wasn't so obvious with the first two customers and the first 10 problems to solve.
Hmm.
So, very quickly, what we realized is that the only way we can solve for this interfunctional friction is to acknowledge what is right and wrong. Here is black and white. We acknowledge what is right and wrong. We will never go behind this ICP, but for the at scale, right? But here is why we need to do this now. Let's also agree to disagree that in the short term we need to do this to
Hmm.
be able to get past, learn potentially, and probably break through a problem, right? And find a way of getting to the next stage. So, for example, for people who have double hatted, sales would like their obviously exclusive AE, someone would like their exclusive customer success, someone would like exclusive pre-sales. But we agree that hey, it's only like we've still not broken through the market. Let that person double hat and play all three roles, and let's hire someone who can play all three roles, right? And you're reaching an effective compromise. It's a very easy example to give the leaders and say you are sharing a resource now, which there is no way you can share that resource once you have three clients, but you're doing it now, and that's a compromise,
Hmm.
right? So I think if you're open about it and acknowledge and tell them where you're headed, but why this is needed in the short term, I've seen people come around, and thankfully, that's how most of the people we have brought on board are intuitively wired to work. Or maybe those who couldn't adapt to that probably aren't with us anymore, Roshan. So it could have been any of these, but thankfully the company has come to into a good steady state on how to operate with this ambiguity.
Right. No, I mean, that's absolutely right. I think I can speak for all of the functional heads, at least. All of them tend to understand the other functions to a reasonable extent, at least more than I have ever seen in my career, I feel, right? And also having that higher purpose clearly defined in terms of, what is the company shooting for, allows you to sort of empathize with the other team that you're working with, for sure. So, speaking from the other side of the table, right? You've now worked with enterprise organizations for so long, right? Large enterprises. How have you seen their attitude change? I mean, cloud has become so huge, and we spoke about the whole SaaSifying of the stack itself, right? And people are a lot more open to, adopting startup solutions, and everyone literally has an innovation program. And, software procurement itself has become a lot more SaaS and cloud friendly as such, right? So, how have you seen that attitude change over the years?
I think we have to thank all the big legacy software vendors for stopping to, for pausing their sales of on-premise solutions. Honestly, a lot has happened because of that. I mean, while we all would love to take the credit of how we've brought in the biggest banks onto cloud for the first time ever, etc., it's also because on-premise CRM stopped selling. Even these large legacy companies said, "Hey, 100% of my incentive for my AEs now is only on cloud sales, right? You don't get for an on-premise upgrade, you don't make money." So no one's pushing that also, right? So having said that, therefore, I guess because of all of the happy confluence of like all of these coming together at the same time, plus pandemic kind of accelerating some of this, uh, folks were forced to adopt cloud and startup tech a little before they thought, because there was no other way to do, for example, virtual calling within days of having to work from home. And once you break the dam, you start wondering, are there other solutions where I can start doing this? My life was so easy and business is so thankful. Finally, I'm a hero, right, for doing this rather than the person who was risking the whole company. Also, many of the cloud providers like us, like everyone, have matured a lot in this time frame and had to become extremely tight on security, performance, DR, etc. Right? So we've also proven that we can like we can handle issues like that and are prepared to handle challenges like that. Right? So I think somewhere we've come to that optimal point, which has probably unleashed adoption, which is probably thankfully like beefed up valuations from like 8x, 6x, 8x to almost 30, 40x, right? So we are in the right place. Having said that, I don't think the enterprises questions are different and they would look at you, they would give you a natural advantage because you are a cool SaaS company that is coming to the table, right? Cloud native company. You still have to, show credibility, the fact that you have solved problems like this or are prepared to solve problems like this by showing very, very deep understanding of their context, their core risks, and being able to address them, right? You still have to probably go through the POC route where you've shown that your promise can be fulfilled, like the few weeks to launch, adoption, all of these promises that you make will you still probably have to go through the POC route, right? So I don't think the buying journey changes. Their willingness to add you to that buying decision definitely has changed, right, for enterprises.
Right. So this has been a fascinating conversation. We've discussed many different aspects of building and selling to the enterprise. A lot of nuances I've discovered as well, even after 4 years of doing this. So parting question to you, you are on, I think, year 7 or year 8 of the founder journey. And there are lots of peaks and troughs in this journey, right? The one thing that you can be sure of in a startup is that there are never lean days. There are never like flat lines. I mean, it's always up or down, right? It's excitement or anxiety, almost in equal halves. You keep doing this up and down and so on. For founders listening to the podcast, how do you think they should think about the journey itself? I mean, if they're going to go 10, 15 years to building a great business, how should they think about the journey itself? Any words of advice, any things that have worked for you personally?
Yeah, I think two things that have worked for me, and I can say even Venkat, co-founder, right? Because we keep talking about this quite often. Highs and lows you can't avoid. Really, really bad days you can't avoid. Really good days, of course, you won't avoid, right? I think two, three things matter. We've realized along this journey. One is initially, yes, you're pouring your whole passion into giving birth to this baby and like making sure it's alive for a couple of years and making it to validation either because of big customer wins or investments or whatever that is, right? After that, I think yes, you pour everything into this at that point in time, but right after, very immediately, it's very important for you to figure out something that you care about in your life with equally or more for. This cannot be. I know that a like lot of founders go through mental health, and even at times, even I feel like I'm going through some mental health crisis, etc. There is a lot of second guessing you will do. There is a lot of bets that won't work, a few that will work. It's ups and downs you can't avoid, right? But it's important for you to have something in your life that is more important than this. I've seen people say that this is everything, and they're putting other things on hold in life. I've heard people say marriage on hold and children on hold and something else that they care about on hold and a passion on hold and hobbies on hold, etc. I don't think that is healthy for the long term. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and anyone should look at building a business that way. You get lucky because you are a Zoom and pandemic has helped you grow like 100x, but otherwise when you're starting up there is a 99.9% probability. Math says that you will fail, and to make it successful you have to survive and give it enough time, do the right things, right? So you'll definitely need something beyond this. Second thing, is for Venkat and me, somewhere the joy of building this has actually been the team and org that we have built, right? So it keeps us sane, it keeps us real. It also, we derive a lot of, like, why do you show up in office every day, right? Not to use cool enterprise tech, right? Like, you show up in office because you want to catch up with these people and it's fun, and you start meetings with a laugh and a joke and catching up on what's happening in other people's lives, right? So I think that matters. I think you have to be very careful in what kind of a company you build. Somewhere with fundraisers, it's very easy to hire a talent acquisition team and boom, you're going to grow like 2x, 3x, 4x overnight. And all of those are also feathers in the cap. But if you lose control on the culture and values of the team, it's not easy to. I'm not saying we have full control. We always get shocked by new things we discover which are falling apart, right? But you have to make sure that whatever your central pillars of your culture and values are, propagate through the team, because then showing up in office every day will bring you back in terms of even in tough times, right? The third thing has been, which I've learned probably through others more than myself, is to be able to celebrate small things. Increasingly, as a founder, you've done an A, you've done a B, you'll do a C, you'll like do big things, and you'll get these awards and recognition. You forget how important the really small things are. For example, the first time there was a news article about Waymo, which really did not move the needle for us. It was not targeting our ICP. But suddenly parents were so happy with their children for joining Waymo because we were not a fraud as per the newspaper. We were something, right? And that made a difference. It just released the pressure at home for many of our early employees, right? And then for one AE, winning one deal matters so much. For someone finishing 2 years at a job when they've never stuck around anywhere else for 1 year matters a lot. And even myself, I questioned my previous career during the highest points in that career. I was really having a very good time when I questioned whether still this was something I was getting joy out of, right? So when people are having their highs, I think it's important to acknowledge and be a part of that also, to validate the fact that, this comes together and this is where we want you and you want to be, right? So it's important to celebrate on the go, not just park it for some major fundraise or an IPO or some such. So those are three things which I think has helped me and Venkat stay sane for longer and hopefully will see us through.
All right. That's a great note to end the podcast on. I could actually go on for another hour, but I'm sure that you have things to do. So thank you so much for this conversation, Yamini. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Love being here.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.